Today, let's talk about the upcoming armor rework in Hell Let Loose. More specifically, I want to dive deep into tank versus tank gameplay and the so-called heavy tank meta. Because love them or hate them, whatever changes come to these beasts will have a massive impact on the overall flow of the game. And I know there's plenty going in this armor rework, whether it be changes to AT, changes to mobility, but none of that matters, in my opinion, if they don't nail the change to the heavy tank meta. So that's why we're focusing on this right now, because that is what has me worried the most about this armor rework. Everything I'll be talking about here is based on what we've seen in the last two public PTEs, since that's all the info we've gotten so far. But even with limited details, the discussions around these changes have already gotten me thinking. So it's worth breaking it all down carefully. And if you're wondering where I'm coming from with this, I always prefer Hell Let Loose to have a focus on fun and enjoyable gameplay rather than historical accuracy. I always feel like history is a great place to start, but it's a video game. It needs to be fun. It needs to be enjoyable to play. And I want whatever system we get to cater towards that. Before we get into what I'd like to see changed, let's take a close look at the current meta and why it's such a problem. Right now, heavy tanks are absolute powerhouses, and honestly, they've been this way since the 1.0 release. They can one-shot pretty much anything smaller and two-shot another heavy. That alone sets them apart from every other vehicle in the game. On top of that, with only a few exceptions, most heavy tanks are completely invincible from the front to everything except AT guns and other heavies. It doesn't matter if you're in a medium Sherman, a Cromwell, a Crusader, if you're up against a Tiger, you're in serious trouble. And there's no question about it, these are the best tanks in the game. And what's more, they're not just the best option, they're basically the only option if you want to reliably counter the enemy heavy tanks. Now you could argue that the heavy tank's 600 fuel cost should balance this out, but it really doesn't. Fuel income is so consistent in most matches. Unless your team is completely mismanaging resources, you're going to get a heavy tank sooner or later. And once you have one, you're expected to keep it alive because that is your team's ticket to controlling the battlefield. And that's the biggest flaw with tank gameplay in Hell Let Loose right now. Heavies aren't just a strong option, they're basically a required option. If you've ever played a match being in that heavy tank and the enemy team just rolls endless mediums out to be destroyed one after another because they don't know better, it's not fun for anyone. It gets boring for you, it's frustrating for them, it's not good gameplay. The game really doesn't give you that much choice. If the enemy has a heavy tank, you absolutely need one too. If you don't, you're at a massive disadvantage no matter how skilled your crew is. And that design leads to very stale gameplay. Mediums and lights end up feeling like filler, something you only drive while you're waiting for your heavy tank to spawn. And for a game that prides itself on realism, immersion, and tactical choices, the lack of useful variety is a real problem. So what is the dev team's proposed solution? From what we've seen in the PTEs, it looks like they want to limit each team to 2 heavy tanks on the field at once, and also extend their cooldowns on top of that. On paper, that sounds reasonable. Fewer heavies should mean more variety, but when you dig into it, this change has me a little worried. The problem is really never about how many heavy tanks are on the field. The problem is that heavies are the only reliable counter to other heavies. So if you just limit the number of heavy tanks a team can have without changing how they interact with other vehicles, you don't actually fix the core issue in any sort of way. In fact, it can actually get worse. Imagine one team has their heavies alive and rolling, while the other team's heavies are stuck on cooldown because they got destroyed a minute earlier. That turns into an absolute steamroll. Not because of skill, not because of tactics, but simply because of cooldown timers. That's not balance, that's just frustration. Also, with this 2 tank limit, it's going to encourage bad gameplay for players. Commanders will now only spawn in heavy tanks for experienced crews because they don't want to waste it on a noob crew, because once it gets blown up, it's just basically going to be GG's. So that is really unfortunate for new players because they're never going to see these heavy tanks if a commander knows what's good for them. It's not the player's fault, it's going to be the game's fault because that is what it's going to encourage. Also, you will just see these 2 heavy tanks on each side sitting back and sniping, because again, if you lose your heavy tank and then have to wait 10 minutes, that's going to be 10 minutes of pain for your team, and the match very well might be over. Now, don't get me wrong, limiting heavies isn't a bad idea by itself. It's a step in the right direction because it prevents matches from turning into heavy tank spam, but it's only half the equation. The next step is far more important. Mediums need to have a real fighting chance against heavies, specifically in head-on engagements. Doing this will absolutely flip Hell Let Loose tanking on its head into something with a lot more depth. In the last PTE, we actually saw a buff to mediums. They could survive 2 shots from a heavy, which gives them a little more staying power. That's solid progress, but it comes with a new problem. It creates stagnant tank fights. If heavies can't reliably kill mediums and mediums can't reliably kill heavies, then you end up with these long, drawn-out poke battles where both sides are just whittling away at each other without much happening. That's not fun, it's not dynamic, and it doesn't reward smart positioning or crew skill the way it should. So again, while this change is nice, it doesn't go far enough. Mediums don't just need more health, they need ways to effectively fight back against heavies, and this is where weak spots come into play. To really fix the heavy tank meta, the devs need to introduce proper weak spot mechanics. You may be saying, Fresh, what about mediums being able to pen the Panther turret cheeks? That's exactly what the fuck I'm talking about. More of that, please. The irony is, it seemed like the devs were actually heading in this direction, with the Firefly initially having whole weak spots, only to eventually remove them from the game. But let's take this another step further. Let's talk about weak spots for both medium and heavy tanks. Mediums can have weak spots that heavy tanks can one-shot, and heavy tanks can have weak spots on the front of them that mediums can pen and kill in 2 shots. Here's the idea. Mediums should have clearly defined vulnerable areas. For example, maybe large parts of a medium tank's front hull and side hull could be one-shot zones if hit directly. The rear hull, of course, should always be a guaranteed kill with 1 shot, and that keeps them fragile enough that they can't just trade endlessly with heavies. But just as importantly, heavies themselves need weak spots too. Right now, they're basically just rolling invincible front walls. But in real tank warfare, even the biggest, meanest vehicles had vulnerable areas. In this game, you could implement things like MG ports, driver view ports, turret rings, that could allow mediums to engage heavy tanks from the front. And if Hell Let Loose introduced mechanics like this, it changes everything. Suddenly, tank fights become about more than just raw armor values. They become about crew skill, map knowledge, and positioning. A well-placed shot from a medium could actually swing the fight against a heavy if the crew knows where to aim. That would create dynamic battles where mediums aren't just placeholders, they'd be legitimate threats. Not as strong as heavies overall, but still capable of turning the tide if played smart. And to give a concrete example of what I'm talking about, let's look at 2 of the most common tanks in the game, the medium Sherman versus the Tiger. On the Sherman, imagine armor zones being color-coded here. Areas marked in orange could survive 2 shots, while red areas would be 1-shot weak spots. This would make positioning crucial, since exposing the wrong angle could get you destroyed instantly. But at the same time, having the ability to take 2 shots from a heavy will give you a fighting chance. For the Tiger, imagine adding vulnerable areas like the driver's port or MG port. These wouldn't make the tank weak overall, but they'd still give a skilled Sherman crew a way to land a precision shot and actually have a chance at winning. This kind of system wouldn't just balance the vehicles, it would also reward players who put in the time to learn the anatomy of the tanks and practice their aim. And let's be honest, that's the exact kind of depth and mastery that keeps tank players coming back in this game. These weak spots would also put an emphasis on angling your tank for fights, and not just the boring process of rolling up, getting eyes on target, and firing. With weak spots, you would have to put thought into your approach and how you want to expose your tank. And really, that's the heart of what Hell Let Loose tanking needs with this armor rework. Not just fewer heavy tanks, not just longer cooldowns, not just mediums taking 2 shots, but better reasons to run all types of armor. Lights, mediums, and heavy tanks should all feel like they serve a distinct purpose on the battlefield. Lights could still be the fast and flexible flankers, mediums could be the adaptable workhorses capable of fighting armor and infantry like, and heavies could remain the kings, but not invincible gods that warp the entire meta around their existence. If the devs can nail that balance, it completely transforms how armor plays in this game. Suddenly, tank crews would have meaningful choices about what to spawn instead of just rushing the heavy every single match. At the end of the day, the heavy tank meta has been the same for years. Predictable, dominant, and honestly kinda stale. This armor rework is the devs' big chance to finally shake things up and breathe new life into tanking, but it needs to be done carefully. Limiting heavy tanks is a start, but true balance comes from giving mediums and lights a fighting chance while keeping heavy tanks powerful but not untouchable. If the devs get this right, we'll finally have a tanking experience in Hell Let Loose that's diverse, dynamic, and most importantly, fun. I think back to how Hell Let Loose tanking was before the 1.0 release and how much more fun it was. The tanks had weak spots like the jumbo side bags and Panther cupola. Sure, they didn't make much sense, but man, it was a rush pushing a bigger tank than yours, hoping you could just land a shot. Since then, Hell Let Loose has shoved itself into a corner, with every heavy basically being invincible from the front, extending cooldowns and raising fuel prices. The devs need to figure out how to return Hell Let Loose tanking to the glory days of when it was just about fun and not waiting in an HQ for a specific tank because it's the only thing that stands a chance. And as someone who spends a lot of time in these tanks, I cannot wait to see how this all plays out. Anyways, that is my spiel. Again, Not much is known about this tank rework, even with it being right around the corner here. There's a lot of unknowns, which honestly has me pretty worried about what we're going to be getting. But hopefully they got something like this cooking, because if they don't, it's going to go one of two ways. They could put all these changes in the tank mobility, make them feel cool, but hey, if mediums are still one shot at the end of the day, we're never going to get a really good chance to see all that. If it goes the other way and medium tanks can now just take one more shot from a heavy, oh boy, there's going to be a lot of kiting in this game and tank battles will go on forever. And honestly, I will be pretty disappointed if that's the whole rework here. I want depth and more dynamic tank battles in this game. I want gunner skill to matter. So sorry, I'm continuing on here. This is enough for me. What are you guys thinking about the tank rework coming out for Hell Let Loose here? What are your concerns? What are you most looking forward to? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you for watching. Thank you for everything you do. I'll see you dudes on the front line.